We are joined now by Canada's Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, McKenna. Good to see you again.
Great to see you.
Thanks for being here. For the first time in many years, we have the leaders of Canada, the United States, and Mexico effectively all on the same page when it comes to how to tackle climate change and the urgency, maybe not exactly how to tackle it, but the urgency of needing to tackle it. How do you think that shared perspective will translate into real progress at this summit?
Well, it's really incredible. Having three governments aligned like this, it just doesn't happen very often. And I think that what you're going to see is a serious conversation at the highest level about how we need to do our part to tackle climate change. We had a state visit, and we had some really big announcements with the United States when it came to the clean energy climate front. So you saw some announcements around reductions of methane from oil and gas by 40 to 45%. By 40 to 45%. You also saw a focus on innovation and how we need to invest in clean technologies, and then also how we need to work really hard to push on the international front. So creating the momentum that we have here with the three governments who all have very different connections in the world to look at how do we push harder when it comes to the Paris Agreement. We know that we need it to enter into force, but we also need to make sure every country is stepping up to meet their obligations. I'm working with my Mexican and American counterparts on the Montreal Protocol, so that's reducing emissions of hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which are in refrigerants, and they're really polluting. They're tens of thousands of times more polluting than carbon dioxide. So there's a lot of initiatives that I think you will see that we've talked about with the Americans that could be extended to Mexico, but also really looking at how do we play a significant role in the world where you have three governments really aligned, working closely together.
Let's talk about Mexico. That's for a lot of people, that's the next piece here. As you mentioned, the methane agreement with reductions with Canada and the United States. Lots of talk that perhaps at the summit we could hear Mexico signing on to join Canada and the United States in those kinds of targets. Will that happen at this summit, do you think?
Well, I of course couldn't reveal. We're still working with the Mexicans and the Americans to see how far we can go, and I think we're looking to be really ambitious. So I think you should be looking at how, you'll see some extensions, I think, of what we talked about with the United States, and also some new areas for cooperation. What's really important when we talk about the environment and we say the economy, it goes with the environment, and you'll see regulatory standards. We know that if we can align standards on the continental front, it certainly makes sense for business. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities. And I'm really excited because my Mexican counterpart, Secretary Paquiano, is coming up, and so we'll be talking about how do we move forward in a whole variety of areas. And he's been a really strong leader. So Mexico has had some challenges on the clean air front, on the pollution front in Mexico City. So he actually made the decision that they would stop traffic for one day into Mexico City for a number of months. So that was, they're very, very committed as a government.
What will we hear about, you talked about continental approaches. What about a continental approach to carbon pricing? Perhaps a harmonized approach with the three countries that talks about action, of course, but fairness to consumers and industry in all three countries. What should we expect to hear on that if we hear something?
Well, I think carbon pricing is really important. So I've always talked about it, it's the most efficient way to reduce emissions and foster innovations. Companies say that to us all the time, that they think that's really a better way to go than a lot of, other measures. So I think you'll see the conversation. Mexico is looking seriously at the California system, right. So whether they could join on to the cap and trade system. In the U.S., the conversation is in a bit of a different spot, given some of the challenges with the conversation around carbon pricing, but I know that that there will be a conversation about market mechanisms and how they certainly play a role in terms of tackling climate change.
What is the difference in the conversation in the three countries? So, where are we compared to the Americans and the Mexicans?
Well, I think we're in a great spot. So when it comes to carbon pricing, which is sometimes a tricky conversation, we have 80% of Canadians who live or will live in a jurisdiction where there's a price on carbon. So we're pricing pollution already. So we're trying to extend that across the country. We're light years ahead of where we used to be with this conversation. You may remember election, it was talking about this kind of thing was really tough. But you see business have stepped up. They're saying price pollution, this is a good way to go. In the United States, the Obama administration is extremely committed on climate change, but there are challenges, with Republicans, and so it's in a different place. I think at the state level, a lot of great things are going on. California has taken a leadership role, and Mexico is really stepping up. This government is really committed to tackling climate change. I saw it in Paris, where we were working closely together to get an ambitious agreement, and they're looking at, they've got a different economic context, but they're looking at, okay, how do we join on to some of these initiatives that we know are going to make a real difference that Canada and the U.S. are pushing on?
Where do you think, and I know you're going across the provinces still, across the country, trying to come to terms with a national sort of climate action plan and a price for carbon. Where do you think the country has to end up in terms of a price on carbon?
Well, first of all, where we need to end up is we need to show how we're going to meet our international obligations and show tangibly to Canadians about how we're going to tackle climate change. In terms of a price on carbon, it's part of the solution, but it's only part of the solution. There are other measures that you're going to see, whether it's in investments in innovation, whether it's looking at how do we build better buildings, better vehicles. There are different systems out there now. Right. There's cap and trade and the carbon tax in Alberta and BC. So that's the conversation we're having. We're having experts. We have a working group of experts from provinces and the federal government where we're looking at that.
It's fair to say, though, I think that the view of you and the government at this point is that a tax makes more sense than the cap and trade. Fair?
No, we haven't said that. Okay. What we've said is we need a national price. And I hear this from business. They said, we want certainty. This doesn't discriminate against, whether you're doing oil and gas or you're in renewables. It just says you're going to pay more if you pollute. And so we see that that resonates with Canadians. And so now we have to figure out what it would look like. But as I say,
is there any consensus around what the price should be?
Well, I think that we're having a discussion about what the model would look like, and so that's going to continue. I'm also having a lot of bilateral conversations, and you see, even in Ontario with the progressive conservatives, with the conservatives there, they are talking about having a carbon tax. So the conversation has really evolved, and I think there's a real opportunity now to be serious, and it certainly is part of the equation. If you're going to tackle climate change, we know market mechanisms are really important signals, and Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, said that too.
Let's finish on this. Pipelines, because they're in the news in this country all the time, of course. And those who say that you need to tackle climate change say you can't really be serious about fighting climate change if you're not committed to building no more pipelines. Where do you stand on that? And I guess, do you accept that premise?
Look, I think that we have to transition to a lower carbon future. It's going to take some time, and we have to figure out, what that's going to look like. We still need to get our resources to market, and I think the conversation really has to be, how do we have a serious climate plan? And another profile that I'm working on is how do we rebuild trust in environmental assessments? So for major projects like pipelines, we look at the impact on the environment, we look at the greenhouse gas emissions, we look at, are we making decisions that make sense based on science and evidence? Have we consulted properly? And so I think that that's part of the puzzle. We have not made a decision on pipelines, but we have established a process that is very robust, that will get feedback from Canadians, and eventually, we're going to have to make a decision. Right. My focus on is, though, we need to see what we're going to do to be serious on climate change. And you have to factor in, what are the emissions, but we also know that we're not going to transition overnight. And so I think we have to be realistic. I'm as much an economic minister as an environment minister. I have to convince Canadians that we have a plan to be serious on climate change, but we also recognize that we need jobs and we have a resource sector.
All right, Catherine McKenna, appreciate your time, and we'll see what comes from the summit. A lot of interest and a lot of people waiting to see where we end up after the leaders meet. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much.